Picture this. You're a 13-year-old boy from a small village in the Balkans, and your world is about to change forever. The morning sun filters through your family's humble wooden shutters as your mother braids your sister's hair, humming a lullaby that has been passed down through generations. Your father tends to the sheep outside, their bells creating a gentle melody that mingles with the sound of flowing water from the nearby stream. This is home. This is safety. This is everything you've ever known. Then you hear them. The thundering hooves against cobblestone that makes every villager's blood run cold. Ottoman tax collectors have arrived, but they're not here for gold or grain. They're here for something far more precious and infinitely more devastating. They're here for boys like you. The devshirme system, they call it. The blood tax, where Christian families are forced to surrender their sons to serve the Sultan's empire. Your parents' faces drain of color as uniformed officials dismount their horses, carrying scrolls with quotas that must be filled. You watch from behind a wooden cart as they evaluate boys throughout your village with the calculating eyes of livestock merchants. They check teeth, examine muscle tone, and assess intelligence with questions designed to reveal potential. When their gaze falls upon you, your mother's hand instinctively reaches for yours, but she knows, everyone knows, that resistance means death for the entire family. You are selected, torn from everything familiar, and loaded into carts with dozens of other bewildered children, whose tears mix with the dust of roads that lead away from home forever. This is how your journey into one of history's most secretive and disturbing institutions begins. The Ottoman Palace system that would transform you from an innocent village boy into something unrecognizable. What awaits you behind the marble walls of Topkapi Palace isn't just education or military training. It's a systematic process of psychological manipulation, physical transformation, and sexual exploitation that operated for centuries under the guise of imperial advancement. Before diving into these forgotten truths about power and vulnerability in the Ottoman court, if you enjoy learning about the hidden realities of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. Please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these complex historical truths together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The palace walls that would become your prison rise before you like something from a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Topkapi Palace sprawls across 7 hills overlooking the Bosphorus, its countless chambers and courtyards designed to house the most powerful court in the Islamic world. But for boys like you, these magnificent structures represent something far more sinister than architectural achievement. They represent the systematic machinery of exploitation disguised as opportunity. You're herded through massive gates alongside hundreds of other captured children, all bearing the same expression of confused terror. The palace officials who receive you speak in hushed, efficient tones as they sort their human cargo into different categories. The most physically impressive boys are marked for military training in the Janissary Corps. Others deemed suitable for administrative work are directed toward educational programs. But you and the boys deemed most beautiful are set aside for something else entirely. The selection process is humiliating and thorough. Palace physicians examine your body with clinical detachment, noting your height, the clarity of your skin, the symmetry of your features. They check your teeth like horse traders, test your reflexes, and evaluate your capacity for learning through simple questions about numbers and letters. But there's something else they're assessing, something that makes your skin crawl even though you don't fully understand it yet. They're evaluating your potential for beauty, for grace, for the kind of aesthetic appeal that will serve purposes you're too young to comprehend. You're assigned to the 3rd courtyard of the palace, the most restricted area where the Sultan's private quarters are located. This isn't an honor, though the officials present it as such. It's a sentence. You're told you've been chosen for the palace school, the Enderan, where you'll receive the finest education available in the Ottoman Empire. What they don't tell you is that this education comes with a price that extends far beyond academic rigor. Your new home is a dormitory within the palace walls, a long chamber lined with narrow beds where dozens of boys sleep fitfully, many crying softly into their pillows for mothers they'll never see again. The older students, those who've been here for years, watch the newcomers with expressions that blend sympathy with something darker. They've learned to survive in this place, but survival has required them to become something other than what they were. The transformation begins immediately. You're stripped of your Christian name and given a new one, something more suitable for Ottoman court life. Your clothes are replaced with silk robes that feel foreign against your skin. Your hair is cut and styled according to palace fashion. Most significantly, you're told that your former faith is now forbidden, that you must convert to Islam not just in name, but in practice and belief. The ceremony is conducted with great pomp, as if this forced conversion represents a privilege rather than the systematic erasure of your identity. But the real education, the one that will haunt you for the rest of your life, begins in the weeks that follow. You learn that the palace operates according to a complex hierarchy where advancement depends not just on intelligence or skill, but on your ability to please your superiors in ways that no child should ever have to learn. The older students explain this reality in whispered conversations after the lights are extinguished, their voices carrying warnings wrapped in resignation. The most beautiful boys, they tell you, are selected for special attention from palace officials and visiting dignitaries. This attention begins with small requests. Serve wine at intimate gatherings, provide personal assistance to important guests, accompany officials to their private chambers for what they euphemistically call cultural education. Each request seems innocent enough at first, but the boundaries shift gradually, inexorably, until you find yourself trapped in situations that no amount of education could have prepared you for. Your first encounter with this reality comes during your third week in the palace. A high-ranking official requests your presence in his quarters after evening prayers. You're told this is an honor, that he wishes to personally oversee your instruction in Ottoman poetry and music. You enter his chambers with the naive hope that this might represent genuine educational opportunity, perhaps even a chance to prove your worth and advance your position. The room is luxuriously appointed with Persian carpets, silk cushions, and oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The official, a man old enough to be your grandfather, greets you with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. He pours wine, something you've never tasted, and begins reciting verses about beauty and devotion. His words are cultured, sophisticated, reflecting the educational refinement that makes the Ottoman court famous throughout Europe. But there's something in his manner that makes your stomach clench with instinctive dread. As the evening progresses, his questions become more personal. He wants to know about your family, your childhood, your fears and dreams. His attention feels overwhelming. No adult has ever focused on you with such intensity. When he moves closer, ostensibly to better hear your responses, you catch the scent of expensive perfumes mixed with wine and something else. Something predatory that makes every instinct scream danger. What happens next shatters your understanding of the world and your place in it. The cultural education becomes something else entirely, something that leaves you confused, ashamed, and fundamentally changed. You return to the dormitory in the early hours of morning, your clothes disheveled, your spirit broken in ways you don't yet have words to describe. The other boys take one look at your face and understand immediately what has occurred. Some offer silent sympathy. Others turn away, perhaps relieved that they weren't chosen instead. This becomes your new reality. A world where education and exploitation intertwine so completely that it becomes impossible to separate learning from abuse. You study languages, mathematics, and philosophy during the day, genuinely expanding your intellectual capabilities. But your evenings are increasingly consumed by summons to private chambers, where officials use their authority to satisfy appetites that have nothing to do with education and everything to do with power. The psychological impact is devastating and carefully calculated. Cut off from your family, stripped of your original identity, and thrust into a world where your body becomes a commodity, you develop what we might now recognize as survival responses. Some boys become manipulative and calculating, learning to use their situation to gain advantages within the palace hierarchy. Others withdraw into themselves, becoming hollow shells who perform their duties mechanically, while their spirits retreat to places beyond reach. You watch both transformations happen to boys around you. Dmitri, who arrived from a Greek fishing village, learns to smile and flirt with older students and officials. Within months, he has better clothes, more food, and protection from the worst abuses. But his eyes have gone dead, and he no longer speaks of the sea or the family he left behind. When new boys arrive, he looks at them with the same calculating gaze that officials once turned on him. Mikhail, a Serbian boy who had dreamed of becoming a priest, takes the opposite path. He refuses advances when possible, endures punishment when refusal isn't an option, and gradually fades into a ghost-like existence. He performs his studies adequately but without enthusiasm, moving through palace life like a sleepwalker. One morning, his bed is empty, and no one mentions his name again. Whether he escaped, died, or simply disappeared into some other part of the vast Ottoman bureaucracy remains unknown. You try to find a middle path between these extremes, accepting some demands to survive while maintaining some core of yourself that remains untouched by the corruption around you. But the palace is designed to make such compromise impossible. Every day brings new tests, new choices between degradation and destruction, new ways that the system seeks to remake you in its own image. The officials who perpetrate these abuses aren't monsters in the conventional sense. They're educated, cultured men who write poetry, engage in sophisticated theological discussions, and consider themselves exemplars of Ottoman civilization. This makes their behavior even more disturbing. They possess the intellectual capacity to understand the wrongness of their actions, yet they choose exploitation anyway, rationalizing their behavior through elaborate philosophical frameworks that reduce children to objects of aesthetic and physical pleasure. European travelers who occasionally glimpse this hidden world leave behind accounts that hint at the reality without fully grasping its scope. A Venetian ambassador notes the unusual beauty of young palace servants and their obvious fear when approached by officials. A French diplomat describes scenes that make him uncomfortable. Boys dressed in silk and jewels attending to older men, with a familiarity that suggests relationships extending far beyond appropriate service. But these observers, limited by their own cultural assumptions and restricted access, never fully comprehend the systematic nature of what they're witnessing. They see individual incidents of inappropriate behavior rather than recognizing the institutional framework that creates and perpetuates such abuse. The palace's careful presentation of these relationships as educational or cultural exchanges successfully obscures the reality from outsiders who might otherwise raise uncomfortable questions. As months turn into years, you realize that escape isn't just physically impossible, it's psychologically unthinkable. The palace has become your world, its hierarchies and expectations the only reality you fully understand. Your original language fades from disuse, replaced by Ottoman Turkish. Your memories of home grow dim, overshadowed by the immediate demands of survival in your current environment. Most disturbingly, you begin to accept the palace's logic, that your beauty and youth are resources to be traded for protection and advancement, that physical submission is the price of psychological survival. This acceptance doesn't come easily or completely. Part of you continues to resist, to remember the boy who once herded sheep in mountain valleys and dreamed of adventures beyond his village. But that part grows smaller and quieter with each passing day, overwhelmed by the practical necessities of navigating a world where your humanity is secondary to your usefulness as an object of desire and control. The most insidious aspect of your situation is how the palace system transforms victims into perpetrators. Older students who have survived their own abuse often become enforcers of the same system that damaged them. They identify promising newcomers, groom them for officials' attention, and participate in the ongoing cycle of exploitation. Not because they're evil, but because they've learned that the only alternative to being prey is becoming predator. You're approaching that terrible choice yourself. As you grow older and more experienced in palace ways, younger boys look to you for guidance and protection, just as you once looked to older students. The question becomes whether you'll use whatever small power you've gained to shield them from the worst abuses, or whether you'll participate in perpetuating the system that created your own suffering. The palace walls that once seemed like barriers keeping you prisoner now feel like the boundaries of the only world you understand. Beyond them lies a larger empire, a broader civilization, families and communities living normal lives. But that reality feels as distant and unreal as childhood fairy tales. Your world has shrunk to the marble corridors and silk-draped chambers where your education in both knowledge and degradation continues day after day, year after year. This is how the Ottoman palace system functioned, not through crude violence or obvious coercion, but through the systematic erosion of identity and the careful cultivation of dependence. Boys entered as children with names, families, dreams, and beliefs. They emerged as something else entirely, products of an institution that had learned to transform human suffering into imperial service with ruthless efficiency. The education you receive within these marble walls is unlike anything the outside world could imagine. By day, you sit in chambers decorated with intricate calligraphy, learning to read Arabic texts and compose poetry in Ottoman Turkish. Your tutors are learned men who speak of mathematics and astronomy with genuine passion, who can recite entire works of classical literature from memory. But these same men who expand your intellectual horizons during daylight hours become something entirely different when darkness falls. Your artistic training becomes particularly twisted. You learn to play the oud and sing classical Ottoman songs, but these skills aren't developed for their own sake. They're tools to make you more appealing, more entertaining for the private gatherings where palace officials indulge their darkest appetites. The haunting melodies you master become the soundtrack to your own exploitation, your voice trained to please the very men who treat your body as their personal property. The palace maintains elaborate rituals around these abuses, transforming them into seemingly sophisticated cultural practices. Officials speak of appreciating beauty in all its forms, of the classical tradition that celebrates the aesthetic perfection of youth. They quote Persian poets who wrote about love between older men and beautiful boys, using literary tradition to justify acts that destroy the children subjected to them. This intellectual veneer makes the abuse even more psychologically damaging. You're told that what's happening to you represents the highest form of cultural refinement. Your clothing becomes another tool of manipulation. Palace tailors create garments specifically designed to enhance your youthful beauty. Silk robes that cling to your developing form, jewelry that draws attention to your face and hands, fabrics dyed in colors that complement your complexion. You're dressed like a precious object, adorned and displayed for the pleasure of men who see you as existing solely for their gratification. The irony isn't lost on you that these beautiful clothes, which might have made you feel special under different circumstances, now feel like chains binding you to a role you never chose. The bathhouse becomes a place of particular vulnerability. Ottoman palace culture places great emphasis on cleanliness and physical beauty, requiring frequent bathing rituals that officials use as opportunities for intimate inspection and contact. What should be simple hygiene becomes performance art, with attendants ensuring your skin remains soft and unblemished, your hair properly styled, your body prepared for whatever demands might be made upon it. The steam and perfumed oils can't mask the predatory attention you receive from those who claim to supervise your cleanliness. As you mature physically, the nature of your exploitation evolves in disturbing ways. Officials begin making more explicit demands, expecting not just passive submission, but active participation in acts that would traumatize adults, let alone children. They frame these expectations as advanced lessons in palace protocol, as if degradation were simply another subject to master alongside literature and music. Your teachers speak of the honor of serving the empire's most important men, of the privilege of intimate access to power, all while systematically destroying your capacity for normal human relationships. The psychological manipulation extends to every aspect of daily life. Meals become opportunities for officials to demonstrate their control, selecting which boys receive better food based on their compliance with unspoken demands. Sleeping arrangements shift according to the whims of those in authority, with the most beautiful boys often summoned from their beds in the middle of the night. Even religious observances are corrupted, with Islamic prayers and rituals twisted to reinforce your absolute dependence on the men who claim ownership of your body and soul. Your letters home, when permitted at all, are carefully monitored and censored. You're allowed to tell your family that you're receiving an excellent education and advancing in imperial service. But any hint of your actual experiences would result in severe punishment. This enforced silence isolates you further from your origins, making the palace feel like the only reality that matters. Your parents, if they're still alive, probably imagine you living in luxury and privilege. They have no way of knowing that their son has become a living toy for the entertainment of powerful men. The competitive atmosphere among the boys creates additional layers of trauma. Those who catch the eye of particularly influential patrons gain access to better quarters, finer clothing, and protection from the worst abuses. This creates a hierarchy of exploitation where boys compete for the favor of their abusers, each hoping to improve his position by becoming more appealing, more compliant, more willing to participate in his own degradation. Friendships become impossible when every relationship is tainted by competition for survival. Some boys develop elaborate fantasy lives to cope with their circumstances. They create internal narratives where they're heroes on secret missions, where their suffering serves some greater purpose, where rescue or redemption awaits just beyond the palace walls. These psychological defenses provide temporary relief, but ultimately make adjustment to reality even more difficult. The contrast between internal fantasy and external reality becomes another source of psychological torment. The palace physicians play a particularly sinister role in maintaining this system. They monitor the boys' health not out of genuine concern for their welfare, but to ensure they remain suitable for their intended purposes. These medical professionals examine you regularly, treating any conditions that might make you less appealing, while ignoring the psychological damage that's being inflicted daily. They provide treatments to maintain your youthful appearance and ensure your body can endure the physical demands placed upon it, making them complicit in the systematic abuse they witness but never report. Your education in languages becomes a tool of further manipulation. As you become fluent in Arabic and Persian alongside Turkish, you're able to understand the poetry and literature that officials use to justify their behavior. You learn that classical Islamic culture includes traditions of admiring beautiful boys, that Persian poets wrote extensively about such relationships, that what's happening to you has historical precedent. This knowledge doesn't provide comfort. Instead, it makes you realize that your suffering is part of a cultural pattern stretching back centuries. The palace's system of rewards and punishments becomes increasingly sophisticated as you demonstrate your ability to survive. Boys who show particular aptitude, whether intellectual, artistic, or in providing personal services, are marked for advancement within the imperial bureaucracy. But this advancement comes with the understanding that your success depends entirely on continued submission to the desires of those in power. Your talents become tools for your own exploitation, your gifts twisted into chains that bind you more securely to your oppressors. The religious instruction you receive adds another layer of psychological complexity to your situation. You're taught that submission to authority is a fundamental Islamic virtue, that questioning the wisdom of your superiors demonstrates spiritual weakness. These teachings are used to frame your abuse as a religious duty, your compliance as evidence of proper faith. The very beliefs meant to provide comfort and guidance become weapons used against your psychological resistance. As seasons pass within the palace walls, you begin to lose track of time in the outside world. The artificial rhythms of court life, the scheduled lessons, the evening summons, the cycles of favor and punishment, become your only temporal markers. You stop wondering what your former friends are doing. Stop imagining yourself returning home. Stop believing in any existence beyond the marble corridors and silk-draped chambers that have become your universe. The most devastating realization is that the system is designed to be self-perpetuating. As you grow older and more experienced, you're expected to help train newcomers to identify promising candidates among the fresh arrivals, to participate in the grooming process that will prepare them for the same fate you've endured. Your survival depends on becoming complicit in perpetuating the cycle of abuse, making you both victim and perpetrator in ways that ensure your psychological destruction remains complete. This psychological trap represents the palace system's most brilliant and cruel innovation. The administrators who designed this institution understood that breaking children required more than physical force. It demanded their participation in their own destruction. By making survival dependent on complicity, they ensured that victims would police themselves and each other, creating a self-sustaining mechanism of exploitation that required minimal oversight from those in ultimate authority. Your third year in the palace brings a new horror that you hadn't anticipated. The officials begin organizing what they call cultural exchanges, elaborate dinner parties where foreign diplomats and wealthy merchants are entertained by the palace's most beautiful residents. These gatherings are presented as sophisticated social events showcasing Ottoman refinement, but they serve a darker purpose. You and other boys are displayed like living art pieces, your beauty and talents offered for the appreciation of guests who pay handsomely for the privilege. The preparation for these events is meticulous and degrading. Palace servants spend hours perfecting your appearance, applying cosmetics to enhance your features, arranging your hair in elaborate styles, dressing you in specially designed garments that emphasize your youth and beauty. You're coached in conversation topics that will intrigue foreign visitors, taught to recite poetry in multiple languages, and instructed in musical performances that will demonstrate Ottoman cultural sophistication. But these skills are merely the opening act for entertainment that grows progressively more disturbing as the evening unfolds and wine loosens tongues and inhibitions. The foreign guests, initially impressed by displays of artistic talent and intellectual achievement, gradually reveal appetites that have nothing to do with cultural appreciation. Their questions become more personal, their touches more lingering, their requests more explicit as palace officials encourage increasingly intimate interactions. You watch older boys navigate these treacherous waters with skills learned through bitter experience. They know how to deflect the most dangerous advances while satisfying enough curiosity to avoid punishment. They've mastered the art of appearing willing while maintaining some internal distance from their own degradation. But even their expertise can't protect them from guests whose wealth and status grant them special privileges within the palace hierarchy. These international visitors bring with them stories of the outside world that both fascinate and torment you. They speak of cities where children attend schools without fear, of families that remain intact, of societies where beauty doesn't automatically become a commodity for exploitation. Their casual references to normal life serve as painful reminders of everything you've lost, everything you'll never experience. Yet these same men who describe such worlds participate eagerly in the systematic abuse that defines your existence. The palace's accounting system treats boys like any other valuable asset, tracking their training costs, their earning potential, and their expected lifespan within the institution. Officials maintain detailed records of which boys prove most popular with different types of visitors, which skills command the highest prices, and which physical characteristics remain in demand as fashions change. You begin to understand that your body has been assigned a monetary value, that your suffering generates revenue for the imperial treasury. Some boys attempt to resist this commodification by deliberately making themselves less appealing, gaining weight, scarring their faces, or developing behavioral problems that reduce their market value. But such rebellion rarely succeeds for long. Palace physicians have methods for maintaining physical perfection, despite attempts at self-sabotage, while psychological conditioning makes sustained resistance nearly impossible for minds already broken by years of systematic abuse. The seasonal rhythms of palace life create their own forms of torment. Spring brings new arrivals, fresh-faced boys torn from their families to replenish the supply of available beauty. Summer intensifies the social calendar, with more frequent gatherings and greater demands for entertainment. Autumn sees the departure of those who've aged beyond usefulness, sent to distant provinces or simply disappearing from palace records. Winter provides brief respite from some activities, but the confined quarters make escape from unwanted attention even more difficult. Your fourth year marks a turning point in your psychological development. The constant stress and trauma have fundamentally altered your brain chemistry in ways that medieval medicine couldn't understand, but modern neuroscience recognizes as profound damage. Your capacity for trust has been destroyed, your ability to form healthy relationships permanently impaired. You experience what we would now call dissociative episodes, periods where you seem to float outside your own body, observing your abuse as if it were happening to someone else. The palace's medical staff notes these changes with clinical interest rather than concern. They document symptoms of what they call nervous disorders, trembling hands, disrupted sleep, periods of uncontrollable weeping or laughter. But their interventions focus on maintaining your utility rather than addressing your suffering. They provide substances to calm your nerves before important performances, stimulants to maintain your energy during demanding periods, and various treatments designed to preserve your physical beauty, despite the psychological deterioration they witness daily. Your relationships with other boys become increasingly complex and painful. The shared trauma should create bonds of mutual support, but the competitive environment makes genuine friendship nearly impossible. Every boy represents both a potential ally and a rival for limited protection and privileges. You learn to read micro-expressions and body language with survival-level intensity, constantly assessing who might be trusted, who poses a threat, and who has gained or lost favor with those in authority. The older residents who've survived longest in the palace develop their own methods of psychological preservation. Some retreat into elaborate internal worlds where they maintain fantasy identities unconnected to their physical circumstances. Others adopt a cynical philosophy that treats their situation as an elaborate game, where victory means extracting maximum advantage from minimal agency. A few achieve a kind of dissociative numbness that allows them to endure any experience without apparent emotional impact. You try each of these coping strategies at different times, but none provides lasting relief from the fundamental horror of your situation. The fantasy worlds crumble when confronted with brutal reality. The cynical game playing requires energy you often lack. The emotional numbness, while protective, also cuts you off from any positive experiences that might make survival worthwhile. You find yourself cycling between different defensive postures, never finding one that offers complete protection from the psychological assault of daily life. The palace's architectural design reinforces your imprisonment in subtle but powerful ways. The maze-like layout makes navigation difficult without intimate familiarity, discouraging escape attempts by boys who might become lost in corridors that all look similar. The placement of guards and surveillance points ensures that private conversations remain nearly impossible. Even the decoration serves psychological purposes. Beautiful mosaics and calligraphy create an atmosphere of refinement that makes the abuse seem somehow more acceptable, more civilized than crude violence. Your education continues throughout these ordeals, creating a bizarre juxtaposition between intellectual development and psychological destruction. You master complex mathematical concepts while learning to endure physical violation. You memorize classical poetry while developing survival skills no child should need. Your mind expands in some directions while contracting in others, creating a fractured consciousness that struggles to integrate learning with experience. The palace's system of internal communication operates through coded language and subtle signals that take years to fully understand. A particular arrangement of objects in common areas might indicate which boys are summoned for evening duties. Specific musical phrases during lessons could convey warnings about dangerous officials or opportunities for minor rebellions. The servants develop their own networks of information sharing that operate beneath the awareness of those in authority, creating underground rivers of intelligence that occasionally benefit the boys they're meant to control. Some officials take particular pleasure in corrupting boys who show strong religious faith or moral convictions. They view the destruction of innocence as an art form, competing to see who can most thoroughly transform idealistic children into compliant instruments of pleasure. These men often possess genuine theological knowledge, using scriptural interpretation and religious philosophy to justify their actions and confuse boys who once found comfort in faith. The systematic corruption of belief becomes another tool of control, removing spiritual resources that might otherwise provide psychological refuge. Your 5th year brings awareness that your time as a favored plaything is approaching its end. Palace preferences tend toward extreme youth, and boys who survive long enough to show signs of physical maturity face uncertain futures. Some transition to administrative roles within the imperial bureaucracy, their intimate knowledge of palace operations, making them valuable but dangerous employees. Others are assigned to distant provinces where their silence about court secrets can be more easily maintained. A few simply vanish from palace records, their fate unrecorded and unmourned. The approaching transition fills you with conflicting emotions. Part of you desperately wants to escape the cycle of abuse that has defined your existence for years. But another part fears the unknown. You've spent so long within palace walls that the outside world feels foreign and threatening. Your identity has become so intertwined with your role as a beautiful object that you struggle to imagine existing any other way. The palace has succeeded in making you dependent not just physically but psychologically on the very system that destroys you. The training of your potential replacements becomes a daily reminder of your diminishing value. You watch new arrivals go through the same process of breaking and reconstruction that you endured, but now you see it from the perspective of someone who survived, rather than someone experiencing it for the first time. This shift in viewpoint is both horrifying and oddly comforting. Horrifying because you understand exactly what these children will endure. Comforting because their presence means you're no longer the most vulnerable person in your environment. Your dreams, when sleep comes at all, blend memories of home with palace experiences in ways that make waking a relief rather than a burden. You dream of your mother's face, but she speaks in Ottoman Turkish and wears palace robes. You dream of running through mountain meadows, but the grass transforms into silk carpets and the sky becomes a painted ceiling. Even your unconscious mind has been colonized by the institution that claimed your childhood, making true psychological escape impossible even in sleep. The realization that this system has operated for centuries, consuming thousands of boys like you, adds a dimension of cosmic horror to your individual suffering. You're not unique. You're simply the latest in an endless procession of children who've been processed through this machine of exploitation and degradation. Your pain isn't special or meaningful. It's routine, predictable, part of a well-established pattern that will continue long after you're gone. This knowledge destroys any remaining illusions about the significance of your individual struggle for survival and dignity. Yet somehow, even in this manufactured hell, fragments of humanity persist. A shared glance of understanding between boys facing similar ordeals. A moment of genuine laughter during a brief respite from surveillance. An act of small kindness that serves no strategic purpose, but affirms that something decent remains alive beneath the layers of corruption and conditioning. These moments don't redeem the system or justify the suffering, but they remind you that complete dehumanization, while the palace's goal remains somehow incomplete. The marble halls echo with the footsteps of countless boys who walked these same paths before you, each carrying his own burden of stolen childhood and manufactured shame. Their ghosts seem to whisper warnings and encouragements in languages you're forbidden to speak, reminding you that survival itself becomes a form of resistance when the alternative is the complete erasure of everything you once were. In choosing to continue existing, even in this corrupted form, you maintain some connection to the boy who once herded sheep in mountain valleys and believed the world held possibilities beyond his wildest dreams. As the sun sets on your 6th year within these walls, you face a truth that chills your very soul. You have become what you once feared most. The cycle of abuse has completed its revolution, and you find yourself in the position of those who once terrorized you. New boys arrive with the same wide-eyed terror you once carried, and palace officials expect you to help prepare them for their fate. Your survival now depends not just on enduring abuse, but on facilitating it for others. The moral weight of this realization threatens to crush what remains of your sanity. You remember the older boys who first guided you through palace protocols, who taught you how to please officials and avoid the worst punishments. At the time, you saw them as mentors, protectors who helped you navigate an impossible situation. Now, you understand they were simply links in an endless chain of victimization. Survivors who perpetrated the very crimes that had destroyed their own innocence. You're assigned to mentor a boy named Stefan, barely 12 years old, torn from a Serbian mountain village that reminds you painfully of your own origins. His eyes hold the same desperate hope you once carried, the belief that if he's good enough, compliant enough, perfect enough, somehow this nightmare will end and he'll return home. You know with crushing certainty that this hope will be systematically destroyed, just as yours was, and that you'll be one of the instruments of its destruction. The first time you explain palace protocols to Stefan, your voice sounds foreign to your own ears. You hear yourself using the same euphemisms, the same careful language that once confused and terrified you. You tell him about special duties and private instruction, about the importance of pleasing important officials and the rewards that come from exceptional service. The words taste like ash in your mouth, but you speak them anyway because refusal would mean punishment for both of you. Stefan looks at you with trust and gratitude, seeing in your survival proof that endurance is possible. He doesn't understand that survival in this place requires the systematic destruction of everything that makes survival worthwhile. He can't see that you've paid for your continued existence with pieces of your soul, that each day you remain alive costs you more of whatever you once were. His faith in you becomes another burden to carry, another source of guilt in a life already drowning in shame. The palace officials watch your mentoring with approval, noting how effectively you've internalized their lessons. They praise your ability to ease new arrivals into palace life, to reduce the initial resistance that makes training more difficult. Your success in this role marks you as particularly valuable, a broken boy who can help break others, a survivor whose very existence serves as propaganda for the system's benevolence. You realize with horror that your endurance has become a tool of oppression, that your refusal to die has made you complicit in crimes against innocence. The other survivors watch you struggle with this moral complexity, some with sympathy, others with the cold calculation of those who've already made their peace with compromise. Dmitri, now 17 and possessed of a beauty that commands premium prices at private gatherings, no longer pretends to feel guilt about his role in grooming newcomers. He's learned to view the palace as a business, himself as valuable merchandise, and the new boys as inventory to be processed efficiently. You're still fighting it, he tells you one evening, after watching you hesitate during Stefan's instruction. Still pretending you have choices. The sooner you accept that we're all just pieces in their game, the easier it becomes. His words carry the weight of years spent surrendering to reality, of a mind that's found peace through the complete abandonment of moral responsibility. He's achieved a kind of freedom through total submission, but it's the freedom of the dead. You try to find middle ground between Dimitri's cynical acceptance and the paralyzing guilt that threatens to destroy you. You tell yourself that helping new boys adjust quickly will spare them the worst punishments, that your guidance prevents greater suffering, even as it facilitates lesser horrors. But these rationalizations feel hollow when you see the light slowly fade from Stefan's eyes as he learns what his beauty will cost him, when you watch him develop the same haunted expression that marks all palace survivors. The religious instruction you receive takes on new dimensions as your role evolves. Palace clerics speak eloquently about the spiritual benefits of submission, about how surrendering individual will to higher authority purifies the soul and brings one closer to divine truth. They use Islamic concepts of surrender and obedience to frame your situation as a form of worship, your compliance as evidence of spiritual advancement. The corruption of sacred ideas becomes another tool of control, making resistance seem not just futile but sinful. You begin to understand how the palace system has perfected itself over centuries of operation. Every potential source of resistance has been identified and neutralized. Family connections are severed through distance and forbidden communication. Religious faith is corrupted and weaponized. Peer relationships are poisoned by competition and mistrust. Even the survivor's own conscience becomes an enemy, turned against itself through forced complicity and perpetuating the cycle of abuse. The system's architects understood that the most effective prison is one where the inmates police themselves. The seasonal rhythms continue their relentless cycle, spring bringing fresh victims, summer intensifying the social calendar of exploitation, autumn claiming those who've aged beyond usefulness. winter providing brief respite in quarters that feel more like tombs than shelter. You've seen this pattern repeat so many times that it feels eternal, as if the palace exists outside normal time in a perpetual present of beautiful suffering and corrupted innocence. Your body bears the accumulated damage of years spent as living property. Your hands shake uncontrollably during moments of stress. Your sleep, when it comes, is filled with nightmares that blend past trauma with present guilt. Your reflection in polished bronze mirrors shows premature aging around your eyes, a hardness in your features that speaks of experiences no face should have to record. The physical beauty that made you valuable is beginning to fade, replaced by the hollow attractiveness of someone who's learned to perform desire while feeling nothing. The palace physicians note these changes with professional interest, adjusting their treatments to maintain your usefulness for as long as possible. They provide compounds to steady your nerves, cosmetics to hide the worst signs of psychological damage, and various substances designed to enhance your performance during demanding periods. Their care extends only to preserving your function as an object of pleasure. Your well-being as a human being remains irrelevant to their calculations. As your 18th year approaches, whispers begin about your eventual placement in the imperial bureaucracy. Those boys who survive long enough to lose their youthful appeal sometimes find positions in provincial administrations, their intimate knowledge of palace operations making them valuable despite their damaged condition. But these postings come with the understanding that silence about court secrets is the price of continued existence. Former palace boys who speak too freely about their experiences have a tendency to meet unfortunate accidents in distant cities. The prospect of leaving the palace fills you with terror rather than relief. The outside world has become foreign territory, a place where normal human relationships and emotional responses are expected, but no longer possible for someone like you. You've spent so many years learning to suppress natural reactions, to perform emotions you don't feel, to exist as a beautiful object rather than a person, that you're not sure who you would be without these survival mechanisms. Stefan, now in his second year and showing the signs of psychological fracture you remember from your own transformation, asks you questions that cut to the heart of your moral dilemma. "Do you think we'll ever be normal again?" he whispers, during one of the rare moments when surveillance relaxes. "Do you think there's a place in the world for people like us?" You want to lie to him, to offer the false hope that once sustained you. But honesty feels like the only gift you can give someone whose innocence you've helped destroy. "I don't know," you admit. "I don't remember what normal feels like anymore." Maybe that's the real victory they've achieved. Not just using our bodies, but making us forget we were ever anything more than what they've made us. The conversations you overhear between palace officials reveal the cold calculations behind their benevolent facade. They discuss boys like livestock, evaluating breeding potential and market value with the same detachment used for horses or precious stones. You learn that the palace maintains detailed records tracking which family bloodlines produce the most desirable children, information used to guide future collection efforts. Your own village, having produced several boys deemed especially valuable, has been marked for regular visits by Devsham collectors. This knowledge adds another layer of guilt to your already unbearable burden. Your beauty, your survival, your very existence has helped doom other children to the same fate. The collectors who will visit your homeland carry information about what makes boys like you so prized, knowledge that will help them identify and claim the next generation of victims. Your endurance has become a form of betrayal, your continued breathing a crime against every child who will follow in your footsteps. The palace's internal economy operates according to principles that reduce human beings to their component utilities. Your skills in languages and music, your knowledge of court protocols, your ability to please powerful men, all these attributes have monetary values, assigned by administrators who trade in flesh as casually as merchants deal in silk or spices. You've become a portfolio of assets, each carefully cultivated and maintained to maximize return on the empire's investment in your training and conditioning. The international visitors who frequent palace gatherings represent a cross-section of the world's elite, men whose wealth and power grant them access to pleasures unavailable to common people. They arrive from Venice and Vienna, from Cairo and Damascus, from Moscow and Madrid, united by appetites that transcend religious and cultural boundaries. Their casual participation in the systematic abuse of children reveals something fundamental about power structures that persist across civilizations, that those who control resources invariably use that control to satisfy desires that would be punished if expressed by lesser men. You begin to recognize the signs of other survivors in the wider world. Servants in foreign embassies who flinch at unexpected touches. Translators whose eyes hold depths of pain that speak of experiences beyond normal comprehension. Palace graduates who've achieved positions of authority but who move through life with the careful control of those who've learned that visibility means vulnerability. The network of the damaged extends throughout the Ottoman Empire and beyond, a hidden society of those who've paid similar prices for survival in systems designed to consume innocence. The realization that your suffering isn't unique or even unusual provides no comfort. Instead, it reveals the scope of institutional evil that operates behind the facade of civilization. The palace system represents just one node in a vast network of exploitation, one carefully refined method among many for converting human vulnerability into power and pleasure for those already possessing both in abundance. Your individual tragedy becomes part of a larger pattern so extensive that resistance seems not just futile but meaningless. Yet in your darkest moments, when the weight of complicity threatens to crush whatever remains of your conscience, you sometimes catch glimpses of something that might be called hope. A shared moment of genuine connection with another survivor, a small act of kindness that serves no strategic purpose. A memory of your mother's face that remains uncorrupted by palace conditioning. These fragments suggest that complete dehumanization, while the system's goal remains somehow incomplete. The boy who once ran laughing through mountain meadows still exists somewhere within the damaged young man you've become. Buried beneath layers of conditioning and trauma, hidden behind masks of performance and submission, that original self persists as a tiny flame that refuses to be entirely extinguished. Your survival, corrupted though it may be, keeps that flame alive, and perhaps that's enough. Perhaps the mere fact of your continued existence, however compromised, represents a victory that the palace's architects never intended to allow. The marble halls that have witnessed centuries of beautiful suffering will continue their function long after you're gone, processing new generations of stolen children into instruments of imperial pleasure. But they will do so knowing that their victims, however broken, however complicit, however far from their original selves, retain some spark of the humanity they were meant to destroy. In the end, that spark, fragile, hidden, nearly extinguished but somehow persistent, may be the only victory possible in a world where power and innocence can never coexist peacefully. Your story ends not with rescue or redemption, but with the terrible knowledge that survival itself has become a form of resistance. Every day you continue to breathe is a day the system hasn't achieved its ultimate goal of complete erasure. Every moment of genuine feeling that breaks through your protective numbness is proof that the machine designed to process children into objects has suffered a malfunction, however small. This isn't the ending you dreamed of as a boy watching sheep in mountain valleys, but it's the only ending available to someone who's traveled the path you've walked. The gates of Topkapi Palace still stand today, transformed from instruments of imprisonment into tourist attractions where visitors admire architectural beauty while remaining ignorant of the human cost that created it. The marble corridors echo with different footsteps now, but they remember the sound of bare feet belonging to children who never chose to enter. Their ghosts walk those halls still, as eternal witnesses to truths too disturbing for history books to acknowledge, too human to be completely forgotten by time.